Marvelous X. I think that's us. I can see the audio working. I think that's us. Paula Penfold joining us in the Department of Conversation. Hi.
Hi, Pat. How are you?
I'm bloody marvellous, thank you. Thank you for joining us. I do really genuinely appreciate you giving us some time today. I'm so very excited to talk to you. One of the reasons, and hopefully this won't offend you, is every time I hear or say your name, it makes me smile. I feel happy about it. And I think one of the characters, I should have researched this, in Danger Mouse was Penfold. Am I right in thinking that?
You are right. And it's funny that it makes you smile, because I remember back in journalism school a while ago, they said that alliterated names can sound unintentionally comical.
Well, it makes me smile. It makes me smile with you, not at you. I'm not laughing at you. I'm like, your name has always brought me a great amount of joy when I hear it. It makes me happy. Just hearing your name makes me happy.
Oh, I'm happy it makes you happy.
And then I get to see your work, and that makes me fucking ecstatic. Not just happy, but over the top ecstatic. So thank you. Investigative journalist is the title that seems to be bandied around with you and on the internet, but you're now kind of making documentaries with stuff. How would you describe what you do if someone said, what's your business card say?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And also I think that title, investigative journalist, is kind of bandied around, and I'm not really sure why, because I don't even know what it means in a way, investigative journalist, because all journalists do investigations. It's just a matter of, how long that investigation is really. And we're fortunate enough now that they've got longer because we've been given the time. So I guess sometimes when I'm trying to introduce myself and our team and the work that we do to people overseas, I say that we make investigative documentaries, I guess is the easiest way to describe it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you would say that now we have the time. I guess what you're saying is because with the internet, we don't have any ad breaks to click into necessarily. We can do what we want when we want. But the media world in general, I feel, still is leaning towards that. When I started in radio in the 90s, all the old jocks used to laugh about how in the 80s, the program directors would be talking about, we want you to be nice, bright, and out of sight. Just get in and get out and make it quick. And it feels like in some media cycles, in fact, the reason I started this podcast was a direct reaction to TVNZ showing me an 8-second video clip. And I was offended by it, thinking I can handle I know I have a short attention span, but I can handle more than an 8-second video clip. Do you think the media in general still right now is leaning towards that get in, get out as quickly as we can? Or are we seeing a trip through what you're doing and people like you back towards that more long form, getting to the nub of it and delving deeper into the issues?
That's such a good question. And I was just having a conversation yesterday actually with a mentor of mine, I suppose, a former boss who's still a consultant producer in the work that we do, Terence Taylor. And he was saying just that he thinks it is 33 years ago that the cycle started to change from kind of long form investigative journalism, I suppose, the way that we used to think about it, which really did explore issues in depth. And then it started, do you remember that terrible line it was quoting a former TVNZ program director of some description. And it was, this person is alleged to have said that TVNZ journalists should treat the audience as if they had the attention span of a gnat. Remember that? It was back in the 90s, beginning of the 90s. And I think that was the time that we started to see exactly what you're talking about, this idea that people didn't have a long attention span and that they wanted things to be done more quickly. But now I think maybe it's a reaction to what we're seeing in the world and how everything has gone so appallingly bad. Maybe we're realizing that there's a consequence to not giving people the full story. And that's what we're seeing. We're bearing witness to it now. And perhaps we're realizing we need more verifiable information.
Geez, you've just, I guess as a good professional storyteller, just completely nutshelled what's happening in the world in a few sentences, and it feels so relative. It makes me think about, I probably should have said this to you beforehand rather than being the unprofessional person that I am, but I caught up with Stephen Davis the other day, who's writing about truth telling and the truth in media, and he wanted to pass on my best to you. I told you he was coming on, and he said, yeah, it's these stories of what's not, being accurate and truthful, and sometimes I think you need a bit longer to explain why. And
on that note, I just and that's nice. Please say hi back to Stephen. He's an amazing journalist, and I'm pleased he's still writing and teaching. Somebody said in relation to, so maybe I should back up the track a bit, because you got in touch with me, Pat, obviously after our most recent investigation into Wiri Te Kahika in Advanced New Zealand, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But when that was first published, somebody said to me on Facebook, can you please put out a pre-seed version of this, maybe like a 3-minute snapshot? And I didn't reply because, that documentary was 47 minutes long, and it was 47 minutes long for a reason. It took 47 minutes to get all the facts into it. So I didn't say anything, but luckily somebody else replied to that comment and said, isn't that precisely what got us into the mess that we're in? And I very much appreciated that reaction.
Let's have a look, and I want to call this, for people who are watching, we're showing this, it's called Stuff Circuit, the place that you can go and find it. It's called False Prophet, and I will address it as the soon-to-be award-winning documentary that you guys made, because it is flippin' amazing. I've watched it. I've already told you this, and it's not because I'm trying to suck up or I was doing extra research. I've watched it twice. Just because it's such a good watch as well. So it's not only an amazing piece of investigative journalist or storytelling or documentary storytelling, whatever you want to call it, but it's also just a really good watch. I did say when I put the post up on my Facebook page, completely respectfully, it probably could win the Captain Obvious award though as well. Not because there was anything wrong with it, but what else did we expect of this person? You know what I mean? It was like it exposed everything you expected to be exposed of a shyster. Basically.
It's funny. I guess a lot of people did know this stuff, and maybe others had assumed it would be the case, but clearly there were plenty who either didn't know and hadn't made that assumption, and we thought that it was important that they did know that there was information about Mr. Te Kahika that we knew about that was at odds with the way that he described himself. So we thought it would be sensible to investigate those claims. And
one of the things I appreciated so much about it is, what I do here, I'm able to connect with people like I did with you, or whoever I want, who is interesting to have a conversation. I thought about talking to him, and I thought he probably would come on because he'd probably go to the opening of a paper bag if there's an audience, but I chose not to because I kind of think in general the best antidote, whatever, to bad facts and bad conversation is good facts and good conversation, to bring light to it. My mum used to say what is the old saying? The best disinfectant is sunlight. Is that the saying? Anyway.
Yeah, sunlight is, we use that line a lot around our office.
Yeah. But then I chose not to because I didn't want to platform necessarily or reiterate any of the 5G conspiracies or the COVID conspiracies. I thought it was too much. So you doing what you did made me extra happy because there was a part of me which kind of went, I could get in there and have a bit of a crack with this guy, but you did it right. I'm just some thickhead from Dunedin who sort of would have a bit of argy-bargy with him, but you did it right and you did it verifiable facts, and you drill down into the topic. So that's probably one of the reasons I enjoyed it so much. It's like you did what we as a country needed to see, and you did it right, which was cool.
Thank you. I'm really pleased that you saw it that way. That's very generous. And it was a really conscious decision, obviously, to do it that way, and that we weren't interested in doing our story on him, and we weren't interested in interviewing him as a political leader, if that's what you would call him. You wouldn't now, but because we didn't want to, for precisely the reasons that you described, we didn't want to give him a platform to be airing his conspiracy theories, because he already has that platform direct on Facebook, right? The thing that we wanted to do was to talk about the messenger himself rather than the messages that he puts out there. And in order to do that, it's a really, I don't know, it's a lot harder to do those investigations than people might realize, because for one thing, you are, while we have to be fearless and all of that and this kind of work, you do know that he's litigious and that he's been banding around legal letters for the past couple of months every time somebody criticises him. And so obviously always we want to make sure that the information that we're publishing is correct, but there's you do feel very keenly the burden of responsibility that what you're about to publish might cost your company a great deal of money if you get it wrong. So I think we said in the documentary or in one of the written pieces that was published at the same time that for every person you see in the documentary, they represent, I don't know, each person probably represents a dozen more that we've spoken to in order to find out and back up and verify and corroborate and prove every claim we make. So yeah, it's not surprising that that you didn't do it, and it's not surprising that most other journalists haven't done it because it's too time consuming.
It was one of the questions. How long did you spend, like you said, let's call it an hour. It's actually a broadcast hour, isn't it? 47-ish minutes. How long did you actually spend on that investigation?
Well, that's another really good question, because this one was, for us at Stuff Circuit, this was a really fast turnaround. It usually takes us, a long time to do a story. I mean, some of the stories that we've done in the past took a year, but in fact, several investigations have been done over several years. Anyway, the short answer is it took 5 weeks. But that took 5 weeks of 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Wow.
So I know then, you kind of collapse at the end of it because, that's a lot of work. And you look at 47 minutes and you wonder why it might take that long to do. But hopefully the explanation I've just given you in terms of for my own level of comfort and reassurance that everything we say is right, we just need to keep going back and back and back and back. And when I say we, there are 2 of us. Louisa Cleave is the producer who I work with, and myself. And so we're doing all of that research. There was a third journalist, James Baker, who worked particularly on the anti-Semitism aspect of that investigation. So there's not many of us trying to do that amount of work, which is why it took so many hours in the day over those 5 weeks.
Well, and the thing about the information being so good is that, like, I love the conspiracy theorist conversation. Some conspiracy theorists and theories aren't, who cares if people think the earth is flat? It doesn't really change how we live, same as the moon landing. But when you start getting into COVID conversations and that kind of stuff, it has a very real world, very immediate response. And obviously, other than finding, and I found this because I've spoken to flat earthers on this. In fact, I spoke to the world's biggest flat earther, and having him share his thoughts around the flat earth and me being able to go, but what about? And him going, I don't know. That's not going to cause anyone to take a risk that's going to kill themselves. Whereas the COVID stuff is really serious. And other than when people find, for example, the moon landing, that tends to be, for want of a better word, a gateway conspiracy theory that will lead them to and I found this is what pulled me away from talking to flat earthers, that will then lead them into, because it happened to me, people saying that the Christchurch massacre was a false flag. It was like they get in on the easy ones and they go to the more serious ones. Having it done properly when it is the more serious one and show people for what they are when they are saying things about things like COVID, I think is a service to the country, probably in theory to the world right now, that needs to be done properly. And again, not to kiss your ass or anything, but the soon-to-be award-winning thing, you guys did it properly. It was brilliant.
Thank you. All of those things that you just said, I find super interesting myself, because one of those things about the conspiracy, the research that's come out just recently around the fact that once you believe one of those conspiracy theories, the chances are you believe many or all of them. And especially when you look at the cesspit that is QAnon and some of the work that David Farrier, for instance, has been doing around exposing how people like Belita Kahika have fallen down that rabbit hole. But it also ties back into, which is interesting that you raised Christchurch, because it ties back into some work that we did last year in a documentary that we called Infinite Evil, which looked at radicalization and 8chan in particular. And it's just so horrifying, isn't it? Once you start to fall down that rabbit hole yourself of looking at other people's rabbit holes, it's really quite terrifying to see the way that people are being manipulated without any awareness on their part that that's happening to them.
Yeah, there's a really interesting guy we spoke to a little while ago an Australian academic based out of the UK, and we talked to him when he was in Berlin, I think, called Professor Stephen Lewandowski. And Professor Lewandowski has done a whole bunch of research in the area of psychology as to conspiracy theorists and why people believe something when the evidence would be the opposite. And also when presented with that evidence, why they don't change their position. And that's where his area of interest and research is in. And some of the things he said along the lines of believing one, believing all, it was a really interesting podcast we spent with him. And for people who are looking to learn more about this kind of conspiracy theorist and what they are, he's a really interesting guy to read up on because
he sounds great.
Yeah,
and aligned with that psychology is the work, the Dunning-Kruger work, the Dunning-Kruger effect, isn't it? That and we thought about writing about this in relation to Billy Te Kahika because it shows that people who are least likely to be able to perform a task often are the most likely to overestimate their ability at that task, which seems to be precisely what was happening with Billy Te Kahika. He would go public and say that because he did some intelligence courses in the military, that's what qualified him to be able to do his own research about all of these things, which he denies are conspiracy theories, because he could not recognize that that's what was happening to him.
And then you get, in New Zealand, I think maybe we're lucky from purely a population-wise that even though proportionally it may be the same, I suspect it's not, but the number of people in New Zealand that then adhere to those conspiracies are low. But what happens when you get to America, if I can share with you and the people who are watching, is you end up getting, at a Donald Trump rally yesterday, the crowd starting a chant wanting to get rid of a health professional who's trying to keep them alive. And I know they've often talked about the Nuremberg rallies and the Trump rallies, but this chant here... Fire Fauci, started up by the crowd. I've almost never heard anything more terrifying in my life when you get to the end of those conspiracy theorists, QAnon people, than a whole crowd of people wanting a man who has done more for that country and will continue to do more for that country long after Trump has gone out of office, whether that's tomorrow, good Lord, or in 4 years from now, good Lorder, if that's a word. And they want him to go away because basically Trump has poisoned that well.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend about it the other day. At the weekend, I said to her, I feel like I'm actually, there's a physical reaction. I'm feeling kind of almost ill at watching what's happening in America and I think it's partly because it's so beyond our control or ability to have any influence over. But just back to the New Zealand way that you introduced that idea, yes, it's true. I hope that proportionally speaking, we have fewer believers in those kinds of conspiracy theories here, but we have enough. And I wonder if the numbers are growing. And also when you go to a rally like the one we went to in September, the Freedom Rally at which Billy Te Kahika spoke, and there were things that were erupting from the crowd as well. And we did some Vox Pop interviews with marchers afterwards. I remember one in particular from this, well, I remember all of them actually, because I was so kind of deeply affected by the self-belief that these people exhibited. And one of them was just shouting, I can't do it in quite the same way, but he was just shouting freedom at us towards our camera. And I thought, why? The whole premise of this rally was about their freedoms, being hampered, and their argument that the lockdown is preventing their freedoms, quashing their freedoms. And so then it's when you link it back to what you're seeing in America and the same kind of ideas being perpetuated by the people who are leading these rallies. But the words by the people who spoke at those rallies were so utterly meaningless, and yet they are absolutely lapped up and believed as if they have an incredibly deep and necessary meaning. It was really frightening.
Yeah, it's I mean, everyone knows now about the Laura Ingram comments in the last couple of days about New Zealand going into, what is it, quarantine camps and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that's interesting is the gentleman she was talking to, Mr. Hansen, I think it was, who was pretty high up in some sort of, public profile position, was like, I don't know why these New Zealanders are putting up with this. And it's like, but the reason we're able to have 40,000 at Eden Park or weddings or funerals or, whatever, is because we chose to put up with that. So we actually have our freedoms because we chose to do that. And you're saying there's been only 25 deaths in New Zealand. Why are they putting up with this? And either they're doing it on purpose, or it's a cognitive dissonance, so to speak. They're making a lie for the sake of their argument. They're saying, why are they doing this? There's no problems. They can't understand that we're doing this, so there's no problems. It's a weird disconnect. The presser I was just talking about talks about motivated cognition. He says the thing about conspiracy theorists, and it's a motivated cognition. So they come up with the answer that they want, and then they use the formula to get there. And if you present them with evidence contrary to that, they'll either fit the evidence in to get to the same answer, or they'll ignore the evidence. So yeah, motivated cognition is the term he used, and I love it. I love the way of understanding it. Yeah.
And back to that, how you introduced that idea in terms of the risk of believing those conspiracy theories and the connection that started to arise between coronavirus and 5G, for instance. And then you started to see this flurry of cell phone towers being burned, not just around the world, but here too. I mean, there's been something like a dozen cell phone towers burned in New Zealand. Well, I mean, at the moment, the consequences for that so far have been material, I suppose, but obviously that's dangerous. So, and then there's the real danger in convincing people that coronavirus is a hoax or no worse than the seasonal flu. Well, patently, that's dangerous if you have then people deciding not to get tested. And one of the things back at that rally that I found particularly alarming was that two of the women we spoke to who were marching, two of them were nurses. And I found that quite extraordinary. I mean, I don't know whether they're practicing nurses and what discipline of nursing they had worked in, or even whether it was the truth that they were nurses, but that's what they said. And I found that quite surprising.
Yeah, that's very surprising. You would think public health is pretty clear. But I guess if there's a percentage of society that believes these things, nurses are in society, there's probably a percentage of them just through the logic that is. The other thing about being dangerous with the 5G burning is it's also just stupid, because even if they believe that, I watched some of the ones from, like, they were burning towers in France, and 5G wasn't in France, and they were burning towers in the UK, and someone pointed out that the cell phone that they were connected to broadcast that live was broadcasting on 5G, but the tower that they were burning down was a 3G tower. So it's actually ridiculously unintelligent as well, let alone any of the conspiracy that goes along with it.
Yes, and when those maps started to emerge, when they were overlaying, the incidence of 5G towers with the incidence of coronavirus, and there was, very little, if any, crossover, then what you're just talking about in terms of that motivation, whatever that term was that you just gave it.
Motivated cognition. Yeah. Motivated
cognition. That's when that kicks in, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Then you have to just ignore the evidence. I have an auntie who is like that, and some of the things that, we can't have a discussion on Facebook, and everybody has a family member like this, right? We can't have a discussion on Facebook because when you start, no amount of logic that you can lay out will resonate, will be received, will be understood. It's just a, but what about? And it's just a complete refusal to accept any evidence that you try to set out. Yeah, so you don't even bother going there anymore.
I think the cool thing, I had a conversation with someone the other day, a friend of mine, who was talking about kind of feeling a bit, I don't know, blue or low or down about the world at the moment and how we're reacting to it. But I point, and it kind of reflects back to what you're talking about with Billy TK and the followers, that there are a percentage of people in New Zealand, and because we're smaller, is it enough? I think no matter what people's political leanings are, the idea that 64 of our seats out of 120 have gone to Labour and 10 of our seats out of 120 have gone to the Greens would say that 74 out of 120 of our seats at the moment, which is 2/3, something like that, around that figure, are sort of on the side of politics that rejects those claims. The research that Lewandowski did also talks about the closer someone is to believing in a free market economy and libertarianism, the more likely they are to adhere to conspiracy theorists. Now, that would arguably be on the right, if we can use that clunky form for politics. So therefore, voting for the left is away from that. And at the moment, 2/3 of our seats in Parliament are kind of as far away from those conspiracy theorist ideas as possible. That's quite a nice place to be, to think about those people aren't as impacting, because that's not what, even if people don't agree with Billy TK or the conspiracy theorists, they've also stayed away from that side of politics just at this current moment, which I think is a nice idea for people who are worried about it, can at least grab onto for New Zealand. And what happens tomorrow in the US will give us the sense, has the world rejected it, or are we going to see a result in an election where there is a country more adhering to that side of politics, which is then more likely to be down the QAnon path?
And one of the things that's important, I guess, for all of us to consider is, I just was a bit dismissive of my auntie, but the thing is, I had a really good conversation in the course of this research with a guy who, Caleb Kane is his name, and he's a former white supremacist. And he realized that he had been radicalized by YouTube, and he figured out how to de-radicalize himself. And he went public last year in the New York Times with his story of de-radicalization. Well, radicalization first, how exactly that happened through the algorithms on YouTube, and how it happens to everybody else as well who goes down that path, and then what you can do to de-radicalize. And I had a discussion with him because I wanted to know about those people who believe what the likes of Billy TK have to say. And he said, it's really important to understand the context. And part of it is exactly the thing that we're all aghast about at the moment, which is, what the fuck? How has the world ended up the way that it is right now? It's scary. It's confronting. We feel powerless. We feel really afraid. All of us. I mean, many of us. Most of us have, I hope, the ability to have conversations with people who we trust and try to work through these issues in a way that arrives at a conclusion that makes us feel better about things. But if you don't, then you look for reasons to support all of those things that you're concerned about. And that's where people with their vulnerabilities are really, taken advantage of by people like Billy TK. Not just him, and I keep on citing him because he's the reason you and I are talking today, because of that story. But there's a reason that people are feeling vulnerable. And so the worst thing we can do is dismiss them and their vulnerabilities. But what Caleb Kane did say to me, which I thought was really useful, and he said, particularly if it's the case where the leader of these people is kind of trading on their Christianity, and I'm speaking in general terms, then he said you use religious language with them so that it makes sense to them, that it resonates with them. Say that the devil will come dressed as God, so that they might understand that actually what you're seeing is not necessarily what you're getting.
But then they don't put two and two together and watch Trump holding up the Bible, probably grasping it in his pussy-grabbing hand and going, maybe that's the devil that they've been looking out for, but he's actually standing there in front of them and they're supporting him. I'm interested in Caleb Kane. I'm going to look him up. We had a guy on quite soon after the Christchurch massacre called Christian Picciolini, and he's a similar guy, former white supremacist, was a recruiter for the Nazi movement in America, and now he's working with MSNBC and CNN, kind of showing the way out of it. So yeah, they're fascinating people. The other thing about those kinds of people, and for people to understand, maybe not so much in New Zealand but America, is after this election, no matter what happens, your neighbour is still going to be your neighbour. If if you're an ardent Biden supporter and your neighbor is an ardent Trump supporter, no matter all the rhetoric around, I'm going to move to Puerto Rico and whatever comes out with pre-election, they're still going to be your neighbors. And I like on let's stop mentioning the person's name we've been talking about, but various conspiracy theorists, if we can put it that way, are still going to be your neighbors in New Zealand and still going to be a part of our society. And we still do need to figure out how to live with them. I think it's more there's more of a line of demarcation in America when 30% are going to be Trumpists, and if Biden wins, think that the election's been stolen no matter what. But they're still going to be there, and there still needs to be a way to have that society move forward.
And don't you fear for America for precisely that reason? Now, when you see the pictures on the news of cities being boarded up in anticipation of the violence at the election result, don't you just absolutely fear for America? I love America. There's lots that I love about America. There's much that I abhor about America, but I feel really frightened for the people who live there. And actually, last year when we were in America in the wake of the Christchurch massacre to investigate 8chan, one of the people we met was a journalist called Robert Evans, who does some really great work looking at the alt-right, and he lives in Portland, and I don't think overstating the case to say that he was worried about the potential for worse than civil unrest, for civil war. And what he was predicting then, we saw come true in Portland this year. Tensions are so high that the consequences just don't even bear thinking about at the moment. It's so utterly depressing, isn't it? And scary.
It is quite terrifying. I heard someone talking once about road rage, and they kind of talked about road rage. Most of us normal people, whatever that means, we'll talk about road rage like, oh gosh, road rage is terrible, stay in control of yourself if someone cuts you off. But the thing they said about it was when you're driving, everything's already at 9 out of 10. You're already watching the car on the side, and you're watching the kids that are walking the skateboard over there, and have I got enough walk distance in front of me? That car pulling out. So you're already so heightened that it's actually not such a big leap to go from where you're at in the car, even if you don't know what your feelings are, to a road rage incident. And I wonder if there's a similarity with that at the moment, that everyone is so heightened that it feels like the leap to doing something drastic and serious, physically violent, whatever it is not such a big distance, whether they know it or not. And I've had a realization in the last couple of weeks for me personally, and that is I don't think we, and I'm going to say we as in society, have actually given enough credence to how fucking terrible this year has been, and how actually all of us have gone through, the 1918 flu, and people have been lost, and people have been sick, and the amount of seriousness. I told the story in the last podcast, so apologies for those who just heard it, but I was at my primary school age daughter's school production the other week, and they had a person playing Jacinda Ardern because they did a bit of a review of the year, and they played that noise, that the COVID alert noise, but they played the audio from the day we went into lockdown. And it was 11:59 tonight, New Zealand will go into a level 4, and they played it, and I had a visceral reaction to it. I don't want to be too dramatic and say it was a panic attack or PTSD, but it was something akin to that on a lower level. And I realized for the first time, I haven't dealt with the emotions of what this year has done for me. And it just made me think, I wonder if we as a nation, and the other countries to their own extent, haven't dealt with this emotion. And what I've realized since then is my emotions at the moment are very shallow. It doesn't take me much to feel the emotion coming up, whether it's, I had some very serious news about a person I know yesterday who's very ill at the moment, and I didn't know that, and I burst into tears, and it was just, it's what it was. And I think that it feels like to me, and I guess it's anecdotal and I'm talking about me, but often when I talk about one thing, I think that is going to be representative of some others, that we haven't given ourselves enough time this year to be gentle with ourselves, to actually acknowledge how hard this year has been, to look at how in 20 years from now or 30 years from now, there'll be kids going, was there really a year that everyone stayed inside? That it was actually a really heavy, serious time. And I think add that into the tinderbox that is America, and you can see how, I don't know if civil war is likely, but certainly compared to any other year since perhaps 1776, it's not as uncommon a thought as perhaps it's been before.
Yeah, that's a really smart way of looking at everything. I think you're right that we haven't had the chance to yet. We probably underestimated the toll that this year has taken. We haven't really stopped yet to have a look at it because we're still in it, obviously. And that's, that's on top of existing stress that's arisen from other terrible things that we've been through. I mean, Christchurch is only 18 months ago, and that was absolutely terrible. Speaking of Christchurch, it had been through years of horrible stuff because of the earthquakes. Then we had White Island. I mean, and also there's a whole lot of other longer term stuff. Well, it's not longer term. That's a dumb thing to say. I completely take that back. I look at, so my kids are older than yours. They're 20 and 18, and one of them in particular is extremely concerned about climate change. And she was one of the organisers of School Strike for Climate. And actually on the day of one of their strikes was the day that the Christchurch massacre happened. So all that work that they put into that kind of, didn't get the attention that they had been anticipating. But they have another underlying level of stress. And when you think about that kind of fight or flight reaction that we are programmed to have from our ancestors, that the stresses, the cortisol that is coursing through our bodies all of the time now, that road rage analogy is a good one, because we are brimming with stresses with good reason. So much has gone wrong and we haven't had a chance yet to process it.
And I think the thing that we need to do as individuals is be gentle with ourselves. And that's what I've realized in the last few weeks. Like, I'm not particularly happy with how my year has gone out with some things I was trying to achieve. But what I've done now is I've flipped that for me personally, and I've started to celebrate the things I have done, not get down on myself for the things I haven't done. Because once I realized that I'm in some, this is going to sound weird, but I'm in some kind of recovery from that kind of COVID, crash and all the other things with it, that actually achieving anything this year is high five to you for achieving something, because it's been the kind of year that has possibly just going to be erased from our memories, because nothing happened. So getting anything done has been a positive thing, sort of thing. So I reckon what we need to do as individuals is start celebrating our successes or our positives, rather than, and from my perspective, so perhaps there's others out there that need or want to hear this, that being down on yourselves for the things that have fallen away this year, because everyone's had things that have fallen away, and it's been such a shit year that, and the other thing is, next year might not be that different, because until this vaccine comes through and stuff, don't think it's over on New Year's Eve, but until the foreseeable future, celebrate those little successes rather than shit on yourself for the things you haven't quite got done yet.
I think that's a really smart idea. We should all do a bit of, I've been a bit the same. I've been kind of disappointed in lack of progress in some areas, but actually, it is remarkable to get anything done, really, isn't it? Because it's been such a shitty year. But and it's that also being kind to yourself also kind of connects back to what you were saying before about after the election, whichever election, that person is going to still be your neighbour. Yeah. We need to be kind to each other as well. And that probably sounds straight out of the government's playbook, but no, I mean that. Genuinely speaking, because actually one of the things that we think about a lot in the work that we do, particularly when we're working overseas and reporting to a New Zealand audience on foreign countries, for instance, the story we did last year in Afghanistan. So actually, New Zealanders frankly can be quite racist and not actually care that much about stories that they don't think affect them, that are essentially about brown people in a foreign country. One of the things that is important to us in terms of an ethos for the journalism of those stories and trying to convey a message is that actually all of us have far more in common than we don't. And so we need to think about that when we think about that tinderbox that you've referred to, that actually we're all in this together.
Yeah. I had this thought the other day about America and the tinderbox. I wonder, America's like 330 million people. I'm pretty sure the next biggest Western country to America is Germany at about 90 million. And I haven't come to the conclusion, but I've come to asking the question, I wonder if 330 million people is too big for a Western democracy. I wonder if it's just too many people, because then, 5% of the group is, whatever, 16, 17 million people. And, maybe the best thing for them, I don't want to say would be a civil war. That'd be terrible. But some kind of agreement to secession that, you can make two countries out of them or something. I don't know. It was just a thought the other day about...
No, I think that's a really sensible and interesting thought. It's a discussion I've had with a friend of mine who lived in the States for a long time, and it's actually a logical conclusion to reach, isn't it? When you look at how disparate those parts of America are, potentially it's 4 different countries, isn't it? The West, the East, the South, and the North. And would that make those individual geographical areas happier? Well, yeah, probably, because they don't need to align themselves with the rest. But the problem clearly is the process of arriving at that.
Yeah. And look, they're never ever going to have sounds very defeatist, but the chances of them having another constitutional amendment seems so far away from possible at the moment, because the stats are something like you need 3/4 of the House and 3/4 of the senators, and then 3/4 of the states agreeing to it, and getting blimmin' 51% of any of the groups agreeing right now seems impossible. So because what they obviously need is to get rid of the college vote and go just to one person, one vote, which seems a democratic thing to do, winner take all. But obviously to do that, the Republicans are going to be in the back burners and they're never going to agree to it. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to be too pessimistic, but just to say they're fucked is probably the least professional, most accurate way to say it.
I'm fine with that level of professionalism. I completely think that's fact.
Hey, as someone who does a lot of investigations, I was thinking about you today when I was setting up the studio. And, comedians always kind of tell stories about how everyone wants to tell them a joke. Do you guys get suggestions, you should investigate such, you should investigate such and such? Does that come up quite a lot?
It does. And also the opposite of that comes up quite a lot, which is people being really reserved and cautious around us. And until they eventually admit to us that they're worried that we're doing a story on them. It's like, or they say, please don't report that, and you don't like to say, there's no way I would have reported that. It's not that interesting.
Yeah, it's funny how much people think they're important. No, you're not that interesting. There's not really a 48-minute doco coming out on you and your workplace.
It sounds a terribly dismissive thing to say, because probably there is a story in everybody, like actually everybody does have something interesting to say, but people can be a little bit paranoid, I guess, about us and the work that we do, and worried that we might be investigating something that we're not. But yeah, we do get a lot of people coming to us saying you should investigate this, and a lot of the time they're right. But as I said, we're a small team. There's Louisa and I, who are the journalists, Toby Longbottom, who's the editor, director, Phil Johnson, the cameraman, creative guys. There's only 4 of us. There's, we can't, I don't know, if we could if we had the resources, we would do a story a week, but there are so many stories in New Zealand that should be told that just aren't being told. And I find that quite distressing, kind of from the point of view of the democratic process, because it means that there are, I hope it doesn't sound too cliched, but it means that there are the powerful not being held to account when they should be. And, the ethos the saying about journalism that I hold dear is that it is our job to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. It's an old newspaper saying, but it's true. And the issue is that we're not able to afflict as many comfortable as we should, or offer comfort to as many afflicted as we should. And I find that quite distressing.
It's interesting how when you get a saying from media of the past, you can keep going back to it. Like, I worked at ZB for 6 or 7 or 8 years, whatever it was, and their tagline used to be entertaining and informing, News Talk ZB. And I still use that a lot, because I think that's a really good, for me, for what I'm trying to do, a really good place to be. That if you can inform people, and what we do, give them information, but also, give them a smile or a laugh or entertain them along the way, there's nothing better. And I think, unfortunately, it seems that many of our media outlets, and I'm not talking about necessarily News Talk now, but are kind of moving away from that. And some of them it feels like are going to more the entertainment side of things. I don't know if the project is doing entertaining and informing. I guess it is. But that sort of, tabloid journalism seems to err on the side of entertainment first, then inform. And I don't know, maybe some more kind of stuffy, I don't know, something like the NBR errs on the side of informing and not the entertaining. And if we can find that happy medium, that's probably the way that the public will be most informed. I remember Al Gore telling Jon Stewart on The Daily Show that the only person that could tell the king the truth without fear of having his head cut off was the jester. And I think about that a lot, and about how we are, John Oliver in his Sunday night show in America is one of those perfect examples of entertaining and informing. And I love it. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, me too. It's so clever. And that's a really good example and a good distinction to make, because I think it's easy for, it has been easy in the past for media company executives, particularly who don't understand those things that you're talking about, to equate that terrible, terrible word, snackable content with being watchable and useful. And it's just not, which kind of makes us come full circle back to where we started, doesn't it? It's that, and I'm not professing to have the answers, and what we do in terms of making these long-form investigations, we're asking people, it's a big ask really, to ask people to give us 47 minutes of their time. And so in order to do that, in order to feel that we can do that, we obviously try really, really hard to make things watchable and interesting. And we try to, Toby Longbottom, our creative director, and Phil Johnson, our cameraman and illustrator, they try really, really hard to push that genre of digital storytelling to make it something that's new and bold and brave and watchable, while also giving you, the veggies with that.
Yeah, you got to do that, eh? Do you have the kind of job you think now that you got to kind of keep on the DL what's going on in your work, mate? I mean, can you tell us about what you're working on and looking at the moment?
I definitely can't on this one. I'm sorry, the one that we're working on right now. Partly because, we have to be really strategic about when we approach certain people within a story. And we need to have all our ducks in a row before somebody even knows that we want to interview them in some instances. And that's the case with this one in particular that we're working on at the moment. It's a really complex investigation. And it's an investigation that actually, if we get it wrong, it has really serious repercussions for real people. And so no, I can't tell you at the moment what we're doing. But what I can say is that we feel so bloody grateful and lucky that we are given an opportunity to do this work and to devote that time to it. And it's really incredibly rewarding work to do. I had a message the other day from someone who had seen a post in relation to that last story that we got talking about today, which was somebody had seen the Billy Te Kahika investigation and had shared it on their Facebook page up north, and had used it as a warning to ask people that they knew who were going to vote for him to watch it. And so I find that rewarding. Not that we're in the business of trying to influence elections. Obviously, that's not what we're here to do. And nor would we think that we had the power to do that. But what we are in the business of doing is providing information to people who are entitled to have that information. And so it is rewarding to see that information landing in places where it should and where it's useful.
It does bring me back to that idea about motivated cognition, because much like what happened, I don't know if you watched the John Oliver program, but he did a double episode this weekend, because obviously it's before the election. And so rather than doing one main story, he did two. And one of the main stories was basically about how Trump has handled coronavirus. And if anyone watched that and could still think that he had handled it appropriately, they'd have to either be lying to themselves or some kind of motivated cognition, mental deterioration going on. So
But,
I think he probably was trying to influence voters. That's what they've been doing, but more in America. So you must look at that, though, when you put that out and go, we may not be trying to influence, but surely if anyone of sound mind sees this, they can't vote for this person. And to see that he lost by over 10,000 votes, it gave me a smile on the night.
Well, I guess, the point is that, and this comes back again to what Caleb Kane was telling us, the point is illustrating to people that the person in whom they've placed all their trust might not deserve to have that trust placed in them if they're not telling the truth about themselves. But then the corollary to that is, look at Trump in 2016. I mean, how many different examples did there have to be of appalling, egregious behavior on his part? And yet people excused it and voted for him anyway. I mean, it's dumbfounding, isn't it? But 2020, it's a different ball game this time. Let's hope.
Yeah, but it is hard to read. I remember once Obama was in, and the Republicans had lost the female vote, they'd lost the youth, and they'd lost the minority vote. And so I remember overtly saying the Republicans are going to be out of office for 2 or 3 terms because they've lost these 3 areas, and then the very next term it all turns around and comes back in. So who knows? I will say to people, I was listening to Michael Moore talk yesterday. He lives in Michigan. For those, I'm talking about the Michael Moore, Bowling for Columbine Michael Moore, as opposed to some other Michael Moores that are out there to do with Greenpeace, or Mike Moore. And he was saying, living in Michigan, the polls are probably halve all the polls. Because what he was saying is, back to the QAnon thing, if you telephone a Trump voter and ask them questions, they think you're part of the deep state and they'll give you a fake answer. So he says the reality is, they're trying to track you and find out who you're going to vote for, and that's a bad thing. So he says in those swing states, he reckons, especially the ones that are pro-Biden, you should halve the polls. That was his opinion, and he was right last time saying Trump would get in. But I reckon tomorrow, the only way that it goes to Biden if he wins big tomorrow, and if he doesn't win big tomorrow, if it's close tomorrow, it'll go to the courts, and I think Trump will steal it. And if Trump's ahead tomorrow, he's going to declare himself the winner, and then all hell's going to break loose. So if it's not a big win to Biden tomorrow, I think it's going to be a pretty ugly couple of weeks in America, if not longer.
Look, we are going to be witnessing unprecedented scenes, aren't we?
Yeah.
If Trump wins tomorrow, or if it's close, and I don't know. I mean, there's so much, there's so much that could have been done differently in terms of how the Democrats have approached this, but there's no point in relitigating that at this point. But yeah, I'm really fearful about what the next week is going to hold. I'm pleased and grateful to live in Aotearoa.
Amen. Amen, sister. I said to someone yesterday, they talk about white privilege and male privilege. I've got New Zealand privilege. There is no reason that I was born in this country. I didn't earn it. I have done nothing for it. So I have New Zealand privilege, and I'll happily stand up and admit that, because I'm very, very happy to be here also.
Mm-hmm. Which is not to, it's easy to, we of course are focused on America at the moment, but oh my goodness, New Zealand has some problems that need addressing, don't we? And while we are feeling privileged and grateful at the moment, we have some serious hard work to do, don't we? And some of the crises that we're seeing in America are educating us about the problems that we have that we've tried to deny for so long. And oh boy, we really need to address those head on in the next couple of years, don't we?
Well, as they say, when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. I think they say now when America sneezes, the world catches COVID. But I guess the allegory there somewhat is talking about societal issues and stuff as well. What we see and witness in America spreads around to the world, and it's a mirror. We can see ourselves in it. It might be a smaller mirror that's not quite as clear, but it's still a mirror. So yeah, absolutely. So whilst acknowledging that that I have New Zealand privilege, that doesn't negate there's still more work to do, and that's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Hey Paula, it's been an absolute blast. I've loved having you on. I think we could keep talking about, I haven't even got a chance to talk to you about Teina Pora yet, which I want to do one day. So maybe some stage in the future we can have you back on again.
Love to.
And
love to come back. It's been good talking with you. We didn't really have a barrel of laughs, did we? I sometimes feel like, I'm always the most boring person to have in the room, and probably on a podcast, because it's not like I tell jokes or anything amusing. But I hope I hope you, I hope you might have me back someday, because there is more to talk about. And journalism is I don't know. I feel like this country we're doing some really good journalism in this country at the moment, and it's really nice to be able to have an opportunity to speak about it. So thank you.
Well, and one of the things I love doing is having that opportunity to speak about it and not have to necessarily have a hard out. And I know we've got kids in after school care and that kind of stuff we've got to figure out today. But next time, you can probably see back here, I've got my fridge in the corner here. Next time we'll have an evening chat and have a wine and a beer, or if you're ever in town, you'd be across the other side and have a beer and have a good old chinwag about life, the universe, and everything.
Great idea.
Which is what we do.
That sounds fabulous, Pat. Hey, thank you so much. Good to meet you.
All right, Paula, all the best.
You too. See ya.